but they don't have to. You can't make people care. You can't make people share. You can make them do things. You can make them pay money or connect a dongle to their system. You can make them do a lot of things, but you can't make people want to do those kinds of things. I'm hoping that you'll be able to see during this presentation how sharing can benefit you, how sharing benefits you as a storyteller. It's not just a one-way street. It's not just a you broadcast out and the world hears you. And you can even see that tonight during even a technical presentation when you can talk, I can learn from you, we can communicate back and forth, even though I'm the one communicating most of the knowledge to you. Even if you can't share anything publicly, in other words, if you can't post out the details to the mailing lists because of your customer has privacy concerns, attorney-client privilege concerns, your agency has concern would freak out and put you in prison if you did so. Hopefully you can still share within your customer. You can still share within your company. You can still share within your agency. If you cannot communicate what you have done on a case, if you cannot communicate what you have learned, you cannot communicate what you have done, then you are worthless. There is no value to your having done all of this work if no one else can get the benefit of that work. Now, by communication can be a written report, it can be a presentation, it can be code. If you did this whole long case and the lessons learned is I wrote this neat program that does all of that work and highlights here is the evidence that will put the bad guy in jail, that's good enough. That is communication of what you have done. And it doesn't have to be limited to code. You can create a multimedia presentation, you can speak it, you can draw it, you can sing and dance it. So long as you communicate the results of your work, then you have some value to the community. Now, the term storyteller, don't panic. We are storytellers. We humans are storytellers. That's what we do. The first cave paintings that appeared, in the ancient tombs in France, 15,000 years, however long that, thousands of years ago, they were not technical descriptions of here's where you apply, the spear into the deer. It was a story of the hunt, how they would chase the animals down, how it was along the process that they did. It was a portrait of the artist's life. And a portrait is maybe posed, it might be stylized, it adds flavor to it, it adds zest to it. It brings more to the story than just a recounting of, yep, a bunch of us went out, found an antelope, stabbed that sucker dead, and had us some dinner. You can bring more to the story than just a technical description of what you did. Storytelling is fun. We all do it. Every time you go to the bar and sit down for a couple of drinks with your friends and, hey, remember that time we were off camping last year? And, oh, yeah, tell that story again. We like telling stories. It's a lot of fun. Many people hear the concept of, I'm going to go give a technical presentation, and they panic. It's freak out. I am in the front of the room. Everyone's looking at me. This is not, yeah. Storytelling, though, is fun. Storytelling is sitting around the campfire. It's sitting around the water cooler. It's talking with your buddies and reliving a good time, reliving something that you enjoy doing. And that's hopefully what your cases are when they're done, is that, you kind of skip over the bad parts when you were, stuck out in the woods and completely lost, and can tell the story about the fun things that happened on the trip. We love hearing good stories told well. Those of you who have kids have seen this phenomenon, I am sure, 1,000 times. When your kid wants you to read that one book that they know and love, they probably have memorized the entire story, but they still want to hear you read it again and again and again, because we love a good story told well. Ideally by somebody we love, ideally by our parents, ideally by someone who loves you, because the love is transferred in that story. Probably not going to love the people that you're telling your case studies to, but we love a good story told well. We love knowing what's going to happen in the stories. Stories follow a particular pattern, a genre of stories. That what the story does is it creates tension, it builds tension, and then releases it. And the shortest story that I know that does this is a slight paraphrasing from the Disney movie, The Lion King. Hopefully you've seen The Lion King, Mufasa and the lions. There's the minor characters, the hyenas. And at one point, the hyenas are all crouched down. And one of the hyenas goes, Mufasa. Ooh, tingles when you say it. Say it again. That's the shortest story. That just that name, it creates this response, creates this tension. Ooh, do it again. You like a good story told well. Now, stories can convey messages. There are stories with a moral. You may know Aesop's fables. There are all sorts of parables. Maybe you've heard them in church or synagogue or a temple. Religion loves stories that have a meaning behind them. Now, all of those may seem a little informal, and maybe getting more formal as we get to church, but stories can, in fact, be very formal. One of my favorite kinds of formal stories is the citations that go along with the Congressional Medal of Honors, Congressional Medal of Honor. And if you read some of these citations, they are stories. They're formal stories, and they're usually no more than a paragraph. But what I did here is here's one from, it was issued in 1970. And so, while serving in a forward element in an operation near the village of Mayan, his unit became heavily engaged with a superior enemy force. Quickly and accurately assessing the situation, Sergeant Lynch provided his commander with information which subsequently proved essential to the unit's successful actions. This is all building a story. It's building tension. It builds to this climax that, observing 3 wounded comrades lying exposed to enemy fire, Sergeant Lynch dashed across 50 meters of open ground through a withering hail of enemy fire to administer aid. Reconnoitering a nearby trench for a covered position to protect the wounded from intense hostile fire, he killed 2 enemy soldiers at point-blank range. It's telling this tale of heroism in a formal story. This isn't just, the stuff at the top. The stuff up at the top, that's, the specific details of, the date he got it, when he got it, where he got it. But down below, that's story. That's a storytelling. Actually, I probably should be pointing here, because that's the story. Now, how do you write a story? Where do you start? There are, of course, technical rules to follow. And the technical rules that I think are the best for storytelling were written by Mark Twain. Some of you may know Mark Twain, the American humorist. He wrote this essay called Fenimore Cooper's Literary Offenses. Now, unless you are let's just come out right out and say it, 19th century literary dork, you're probably not going to care so much about any spat between Mark Twain and Fenimore Cooper. I'm willing to bet most of you have not read The Deerslayer. It doesn't matter. In this essay, Mark Twain rips up Fenimore Cooper for writing this novel, The Deerslayer, and specifically that Deerslayer was, rather than paraphrase, I'll just tell you what Mark Twain wrote. Mark Twain wrote, "There are 19 rules governing literary art in the domain of romantic fiction." Some say 22. In Deerslayer, Cooper violated 18 of them. And then here are the 18 rules and Twain says these are for romantic fiction. I would say they were for any kind of story. I'm just going to paraphrase these rules briefly for you. That a tale shall accomplish something and arrive somewhere. 2, they require the episodes of a tale shall be necessary parts of the tale and shall help to develop it. 3, they require the people in the tale to be alive, except in the case of corpses, and that always the reader shall be able to tell the corpses from the others. 4, they require that the people in the tale, both dead and alive, shall exhibit sufficient excuse for being there. 5, they require that when the people of a tale deal in conversation, they shall talk and sound like human talk, and talk as such as human beings would be likely to talk in the given circumstances, and have a discoverable meaning, and have a discoverable purpose, and a show of relevancy. 6, they require that when the author describes the character of the personage in his tale, the conduct and conversation of that personage shall justify said description. In other words, the people who are going to be there should have a reason for being there. They should be believable. The things that they say should be believable. And all of this, everything that happens, should advance the story. Skipping a few things here, just in the interest of time. Number 11. They require that the characters in the tale should be so clearly defined that the reader can tell beforehand what each will do in a given emergency. In other words, that when you create a character in a story, the character should be believable to the point that you know what's going to happen if things go bad. The author should use the right word, not its second cousin. The author should eschew surplusage. And just remember that contains the word surplus. In other words, don't put anything in there that doesn't need to be in the story. If it doesn't advance the story, if it doesn't advance the tension or relieve it or be more part of the story, you don't need it. Omit unnecessary details, avoid slovenliness, use good grammar, and yet employ a simple and straightforward style. That, in a nutshell, is Mark Twain's guide for how to write fiction, or how to write a story, and we're going to work just for you. Those rules will work just for you in your stories. And I put the link up here so that you can use Mark Twain's rules of how to write a story. Now, characters. We mentioned characters. The best stories have really, really good characters. And in fact, if you have really, really good characters, that's all you need. You could make a TV show where nothing happens. But if the characters are good enough, it works completely. I have 2 words for you. Soup Nazi. The TV show Seinfeld was based on the premise of literally nothing happening. But you had these interesting characters with all these quirks and foibles and interesting little folds to them, which when you could put them up against a blank wall, such as the Soup Nazi, who really just only said 4 or 5 words, no soup for you, and see how those interesting characters react, that makes a show. In your story, there need to be interesting characters. And we're going to get to what can make a character. You can make a character out of anything, though. A computer can certainly be a character. We all know the HAL 9000 from the 2001 of Space Odyssey as being a great character, a pivotal character in that story. But there were also characters like Mr. Ed and Lassie, and you can predict how those characters are going to react in any given emergency. Mainly, Lassie will rescue little Timmy from falling down the well, but you know how they're going to react. Characters don't have to be human. And in fact, the best non-human character, believe it or not, is a lamp. I'm thinking like those table lamps that have, the bodies that, can move and adjust and turn like that. They are ideal human characters. Human characters have all these gangly bits that, fling on the side and clothing, which distracts from how the body moves. A lamp has no distracting objects. A lamp is simply a piece. It can move forward, it can bend around, it can turn, it can pull back in surprise, and it can move. People also, when we look at characters, tend to look at the eyes. That's where we look first. It is, yes, the gateway to the soul, but we look to the eyes. They are very, very expressive. A lamp has a bulb, and a lamp bulb is effectively one big eye. I'm going to post this YouTube link over here just to show you 2 good examples of lamps as characters in video. And what I'm going to do for you is I'm going to play the video here. There is sound. I'm going to turn it up for you. But the sound is not crucial. So let's see. This is how Pixar got its start. Pixar got, Pixar logo with the bouncing lamp. This is why Pixar's logo has a bouncing lamp. And so in that clip, we saw 2 characters. We saw 2 lamps, one of whom went through joy and then suddenly sadness, another one who went through sort of frustration and surprise, all sorts of wonderful emotions from characters who did not speak, who did not say a word, who just moved their bodies around. That little butt wiggle that the lamp does, that is awesome. I think that's hysterical. Here's my other favorite lamp character. And this one's a commercial. Well, I'll give it. Let me show. Here's a commercial.
Many of you feel bad for this lamp. That is because you're crazy. It has no feelings. And the new one is much better.
Again, the ad actually plays on the fact that the lamp, which actually doesn't even move, doesn't say anything, but the lamp becomes a character, and you do feel bad for it. You feel horrible. This lamp's out in the rain. It's so sad. You can make a character out of anything. What I'm hoping to see is as you start to write stories about what you're doing, is the characters in your stories, not only the humans, not only the prosecutors and the defense attorneys and the customers and the clients, but the programs and the malware variants and the tools you use. Surely you know those programs have personality. Surely you have come to see the personality of NCase. You have come to realize the quirks of FTK. You have come to see how DD Rescue, how it does its thing, the messages they display, the style that they use. There has to be a character in there. Please bring them out. Go back to Mark Twain and take a look at rules 10 and 11. Make the reader interested in those characters and make the reader able to predict how those characters will respond. And no, crashing is not just the only option. Make the characters believable, and so that we know how they will act. Now, stories come in all forms. And when you do a case study, it does not have to be a blog post, or it doesn't even have to be written. Specifically, I want to, as you tell your story, use the medium that your audience can get. If you're sitting around a campfire, you tell a campfire story. If around World War II, most of the soldiers in World War II were very familiar with comic books. And so they made comic books as soldier instruction manuals. Here's how to maintain your artillery piece, written in comic book form. That's what the audience knew. That's what they wrote it in. You can have a written story, a written case study. And if you remember nothing else from this course, from this story, from this presentation, if you remember nothing else that I say tonight, this link right here to the story of the 500-mile email, read that, write that. It is awesome. It's the story of, well, like all stories, if you just say the plot, it's not terribly interesting. System administrator comes in one day and discovers that user's having a problem. And it's told brilliantly. It's funny. It's highly technical. I mean, we get into some fun stuff along the way, but it's a story. And it teaches you what you need to know about how to solve this kind of problem. Please take a minute and read it. Now, you can have a story that's written with pictures. Now, the first thing most people say is, I can't draw to save my life. That doesn't matter. You can write a story so long as the story is good and the pictures are consistent, so long as the pictures build the style. You can have the worst pictures known to man and not only write a good story, but become internet famous. Hopefully you have seen this blog post on the blog Hyperbole and a Half called This Is Why I'll Never Be an Adult. And the person goes through and talks about how they go through and do everything that they want to do, and that eventually they end up clean all the things. That's what they're going to do. And they go through the rest of the story about how it goes. But the pictures serve to tell the story along with the text. And it's a great story. It's hilarious. And you notice these stick figures, I mean, my child can draw better pictures than that. I don't have a child. My child can draw better pictures than this. This was, the disaster with MS Paint. But it's good enough to tell the story. And good enough does it, so long as it tells the story. The other kind of story you can have with picture, right? Another kind of story. There are lots and lots of stories that you can have with pictures. Another kind you may know is the PowerPoint presentation. And this what I've loaded up here, and hang on, give me a second here to make sure I'm getting all the links out to everyone. Here is clean all the things. And here is now the shortcut link to this presentation. I am totally stealing this presentation from Detective Cindy Murphy. And so this is a Prezi presentation, which I call PowerPoint with cooler transitions. It's also viewable via the web. But in this talk, Cindy goes through the steps that she did of a case, and what the bad guy, the stupid things the bad guy did, and then post the images of himself with the stolen loot to Facebook. Yeah, not such a good idea. Here's the actual evidence. So we're walking through the steps of the case with some cool transitions. It's a great way because this covers the story. And the neat thing that Cindy did here, rather than use PowerPoint bullets, she used full sentences. Full sentences, great thing. PowerPoint, evil. Don't think in bullet points. Bullet points are for note cards, as if you're giving the presentation like you did in 6th grade with a set of index cards. That's what bullet points are for. Stories rely on sentences. Stories rely on paragraphs. Stories rely on characters. We have a great one in this one with Ding Dong posting his the victim's from the victim's cell phone onto Facebook. Ah, crooks. Good times. Good times. Now, that kind of story is spoken in person. Now, if you want to see great talks spoken in person, you need to go watch the TED Talks. Some of the TED Talks vary in all kinds of range, all kinds of topics, and they cover the gamut of soft science, hard science, how to tie your shoes to these wonderfully detailed, complex technical areas. And this presentation I just posted over here by Sean Aker, the Happy Secret to Better Work. It's about 35 minutes of material, which is delivered in about 15. You need to pay attention. This is one of those like, oh, I can just put a video on in the background and go on and do 3 other things. No. You need to sit down and watch this video because the guy is just hysterical. And I'm actually going to take a few minutes here. He starts off with this story about... Are we trying to watch this? Let's put this on here for a second here.
When I was 7 years old and my sister was just 5 years old, we were playing on top of a bunk bed.
I'm going to pause it here for just 1 second. This presentation is about the science of happiness and the therapies that can be done to help make people happier and to make not only individual people happier, but society as a whole happier. He didn't start off with, today the topic of my presentation is going to be. He started off with a story about him and his 7-year-old sister playing. Here's how it goes.
I was 2 years older than my sister at the time. I mean, I'm 2 years older than her now, but at the time that meant she had to do everything that I wanted to do, and I wanted to play war. So we were up on top of our bunk beds, and on one side of the bunk bed, I had put out all my G.I. Joe soldiers and weaponry, and on the other side were all my sister's Milos and ponies and ready for a cavalry charge. There are differing accounts of what actually happened that afternoon, but since my sister is not here with us today, let me tell you the true story. Which is my sister is a little bit on the clumsy side. And somehow, without any help or push from her older brother at all, suddenly Amy disappeared off the top of the bunk bed and landed with this crash on the floor. And I nervously peered over the side of the bed to see what had befallen my fallen sister and saw that she had landed painfully on her hands and knees on all fours on the ground. I was nervous because my parents had charged me with making sure that my sister and I played as safely and as quietly as possible. And seeing as how I had accidentally broken Amy's arm just 1 week before, heroically pushing her out of the way of an oncoming imaginary sniper bullet, for which I have yet to be thanked. I was trying as hard as I could. She didn't even see it coming. I was trying as hard as I could to be on my best behavior, and I saw my sister's face this wail of pain and suffering and surprise, threatening to erupt from her mouth and threatening to wake my parents from the long winter's nap for which they had settled. So I did the only thing my little frantic 7-year-old brain could think to do to avert this tragedy. If you have children, you've seen this hundreds of times before. I said, Amy, wait, don't cry, don't cry. Did you see how you landed? No human lands on all fours like that. Amy, I think this means you're a unicorn. Now, that was cheating because there was nothing in the world my sister would want more than not to be Amy the hurt 5-year-old little sister, but Amy the special unicorn. Of course, this was an option that was open to her brain at no point in the past. And you could see on my poor, manipulated sister's face conflict. As her little brain attempted to devote resources to feeling the pain and suffering surprise she just experienced, or contemplating her newfound identity as a unicorn. And the latter won out. Instead of crying, instead of ceasing our play, instead of waking my parents with all the negative consequences that would have ensued for me, instead, a smile spread across her face, and she scrambled right back up onto the bunk bed with all the grace of a baby unicorn. With one broken leg. Well, we stumbled across.
And at that point, that's when he begins the more technical aspects of his presentation. But he starts with a story. And it's a great story. It's a cute story. It's wonderful. But he is a fabulous storyteller, and I urge you, if you're going to tell stories, watch that whole talk, see how he talks, and do what he does. You can also tell a story as audio only. Now, I grew up, my parents were big into old-time radio, all these shows like Jack Benny and Gunsmoke and Fibber McGee and Molly, and they were fantastic. These were stories literally told on the radio, told with you couldn't see anything. But the thing that I learned most from these stories, from stories told when it's just talking, is the power of silence. People listen most when you are not talking. Gunsmoke was fantastic at this. Gunsmoke would have these wonderful pauses when Matt Dillon is standing there with the scoundrel, and you know that they have their guns drawn. They're just staring each other down and waiting. And it's just, you're on the edge of your seat wondering what's going to happen. Is he going to shoot him? Silence is unsettling. We don't like silence. We don't like sitting there just looking at another person. We want to look away. We want you to say something. Unsettling, if your whole talk you just stood there and didn't say a word, okay, that'd be a little creepy. But if you need to get people's attention, it's okay just to not say anything. Yes, you're manipulating the audience's emotions. That's what a good storyteller does. Now, another format that storytelling, that a lot of computer folks like to use in storytelling is the narrated screen capture video, or sometimes also called a walkthrough. They're really, really hard to do because the audience spends the entire time looking at your screen, and looking at someone else's computer screen is really, really boring. If you ever watch good conference videos presentations, they jump back and forth between any visual aids, any PowerPoint slides or a video that may be on the screen, and the presenter, because they're trying to keep the video interesting. If you just had the presenter all the time, you miss the slides. But if you just had the slides all the time, you get bored out of your skull. Another thing that's very, very difficult when doing these screen capture videos is you must vary your voice. If you don't vary your voice, you end up sounding like this.
The file we are interested in executing is uhdmodes.py. This time we will not use any other arguments.
And already I have fallen asleep. This is perhaps the worst walkthrough ever. And as the scintillating title here, Receiving Mode S Beacons with the Universal Software Radio Peripheral. I can't even say that without yawning. And you don't want to know the hell of it all? You know what this talk is actually about? This talk is about how you can go buy this $200 device, hook it up to your computer, run a couple of Python scripts, and then you're able to view where planes are in the sky in real time in Google Earth. Like, no kidding, that you fire Google Earth and you see little planes going across the screen. Holy crap, that's the most amazing thing ever, or the most frightening thing ever, depending on where your point of view. But that's worth knowing about. That's not receiving mode S beacons. That's, how to do fun shit with real planes. So, how do you tell a technical story? What do you want to do? You want to walk us through the events. What was the problem? How did you solve it? What was the process of discovery that brought you in, that you followed? Actually, let's back up. How did you even get into this mess? Think of the old Sam Spade detective stories, where Sam Spade is at his desk, wondering how he's going to pay the rent, and the secretary walks in, this dame who brings in the case. It was always these great introductions to how those stories got started. How did your stories get started? Were you there at 4:55 in the afternoon? No, I'm not packing up when your boss drops a couple of hard drives on your desk, or you get that 2 a.m. phone call saying, "Guess what? You're going to go do an acquisition in Walla Walla, Washington tomorrow." Okay, great. Who are the characters in your story? Maybe your boss, maybe a prosecutor, maybe a defense attorney, maybe the bad guy, maybe the victim, maybe a system administrator who is completely clueless, maybe a system administrator who is absolutely on the ball. Maybe the bad guy is a character. And, of course, all your tools. They all have their own personalities. And there can be people who are not even related to the work. Your assistant, your spouse, your kid. But tell us, what did you see, what did you do, and who did you interact with? What were the steps you take to run your case? Walk us through. Now, all of this, talking about telling a story, doesn't mean that you cannot pay. That doesn't excuse you from paying attention to detail. You still must absolutely pay attention to detail. And the really good stories are the ones that get the detail right. You may remember the show Dragnet, the radio show. When they walk down the hall and you hear those footsteps down the hall, Jack Webb actually went to the police headquarters in Los Angeles and counted how many steps it was down the hall to get from the front door down to the robbery division. And they put those number of steps in the show. What made The Hunt for Red October such a great story? That it was, yes, this wonderful, great, exciting story with all this fascinating technical detail. That there's so much attention was paid to it. It made the story seem much more believable, much more real. You were there in the submarine because of everything that you could see, everything that you could feel, even while flipping through the pages of a book. There's one topic that does get just glossed over, but is perhaps one of the more important things before you go to publish your story. That's protecting your customer, protecting your victim. This is one of those things where it's hard to correct mistakes. It's better when thinking about protecting your customer, protecting the victim. It's better to get permission than forgiveness. Now, that's not the default position for most things in the computer forensics world. Generally, we like to play, what does this button do? Click and, find out. And, something terrible goes wrong, you just restore from the backup and you're fine. But in the real world, when you embarrass someone, when you post someone's public information, when you make them look foolish, it's really hard to take that back. As a matter of fact, once you put it on the internet, you can never, ever, ever make it go away, including this video. One of the easiest ways to figure out if there's going to be a problem, tell the story to someone else. Have someone else look at it who is not necessarily involved. If there is a question, then there is no question. Take it out. And it's nothing personal. Hopefully your reader is trying to protect you in those situations. Now, if you've heard all this prattling on, you say, awesome, I want to practice. How do I practice? Go to the bars and tell stories. Practicing this is going to be fun. Sit around the office, tell the story of what your last case was. If the people who were there with you like hearing the story over and over again, you have a good story. We like to hear good stories over and over again. Now, there are formal classes on how to tell stories. You can go find a class on creative writing. There are a whole list of them. There's, in fact, a Storytelling Institute, link over here, for the Storytelling Institute, which will help direct you to a local class in your area of good stories. There are also tons and tons of great examples available for free online. I just signed up. I'm taking a course with these folks, Speakeasy DC. They have a storytelling course on how to stand up and tell a story. And they do shows where they have people stand up and tell true stories told live. And they record every single story that's told. And they're all posted online. And so go to vimeo.com/speakeasydc. You can see a whole bunch of stories from them. There's also a podcast called The Moth. Here's the link to The Moth. The Moth has new stories every week. They will help get you in the right direction. If you just want to listen to stories, go listen to The Moth. And if you're interested in just doing a plain old technical presentation, I have a class that we can do for you called How to Give a Technical Presentation. It's about a 50-minute class and teach you what we know about how to give technical presentations. And so, to sum up tonight, if you don't share what you have learned on your cases, then you are useless. That sharing can be code, it can be stories, it can be a case study, it can be however you want to present it, but you need to share what you do or you are useless. Best technical advice about how to write a story is to take a look at Mark Twain's rules. He has 18 of them there on how to write a story. So it all starts with your characters. Pick good characters, make good characters. Mark Twain has some rules on how to make your characters. Good characters make the story. Choose a form. It can be written, it can be spoken, it can be a combination of the two. You can have pictures or not. Choose a form. Stay with it. Pay attention to detail, especially in a technical story. That's going to matter. Protect your sources. Protect the victims. Have someone look over your story. Have someone listen to your story. See what they think of it before you present it, but do not take chances there. And then practice. Go down to the bar, have a beer, and tell some stories. That's the end of my formal content tonight. If you have any questions, we'll try and catch up with the chat window, or if you actually have specific questions, please go ahead and post them over here.